Aliens came to save Earth, but from us. The first time anyone noticed something unusual in the sky, most people dismissed it. A streak of light, silent and bright, crossing the night sky over the Nevada desert. Amateur astronomers captured it with cameras, but when they tried to report it, government agencies remained silent. Newspapers ran small stories with headlines like "Mystery Light in Desert Sky" and then moved on. At first, the sightings were sporadic. One in Australia, one in Brazil, one in the United States. But soon, they were everywhere. People reported strange movements. Massive silver shapes hovering silently, appearing over cities for only a few minutes before vanishing without a trace. The phenomenon defied explanation. Dr. Elena Rivera, an astrophysicist at the University of Madrid, was one of the first to take the sightings seriously. She had spent decades studying anomalies in space and had long theorized that Earth might not be alone in the galaxy. But these objects didn't behave like anything she had ever seen. They weren't satellites. They weren't meteors. They moved with intent, precision, and intelligence. "They are watching us," she said during a live television interview. Her words made people laugh at first. Aliens? Really? But she wasn't joking. There was something intelligent behind the movements. And it wasn't subtle. As weeks turned into months, the world began to notice changes in the atmosphere. Strange clouds formed in patterns too precise to be natural. Birds migrated in unusual directions. Fish washed up on shores without explanation. The news was filled with stories of sudden floods, fires, and droughts appearing without cause. People started to whisper about the sky visitors, but most still believed it was a natural phenomenon, or worse, a hoax. Then the first message came. Not in English, not in any human language, but through light. Cities with heavy electronic infrastructure, New York, Tokyo, Berlin, Sao Paulo, experienced strange interference. Television screens flashed symbols, screens of smartphones glitched with patterns, radio waves hummed with tones. It wasn't threatening, but it was unmistakable. Dr. Rivera was the first to decode part of it. She gathered a team of mathematicians, linguists, and engineers. The symbols weren't words. Exactly, they were patterns, a kind of living mathematics that shifted depending on observation. And after weeks of work, they realized something shocking. The message wasn't for humans. It was about humans. The message warned, "You are danger. We must intervene. We cannot allow this to continue." Panic spread. Governments tried to contact the objects, using every available method: radio signals, lasers, satellites. Nothing worked. The objects remained silent. They did not attack. They did not retreat. They watched. Then, one morning, the skies over Europe lit up. Massive vessels, shimmering and silver, appeared above every major city. They hovered, completely still, blocking the sunlight for hours. People screamed, some prayed, many ran into the streets in panic. But no harm came to anyone. Instead, the ships began a slow, synchronized rotation. It was as if they were observing, cataloging, measuring. On television, live feeds showed millions of people staring upward. The fear was palpable. But in the middle of the panic, a strange calm descended. Birds stopped flying. The wind seemed to pause. Even the city noises faded. It was as if the world itself held its breath. Dr. Rivera realized something. The ships weren't just observing, they were analyzing the environment. And when she examined the patterns of their movements, it became terrifyingly clear. The aliens were calculating the effects of human behavior on Earth itself. Pollution, deforestation, climate change, war, overpopulation. They were all part of the equations displayed in their lights. "They are not here to destroy us," she whispered to her team, her voice trembling. "They are here to save the planet, from us." By the end of the week, the first interventions began. Cities noticed unusual weather shifts. Fires extinguished spontaneously, polluted rivers cleared, the air felt cleaner. Scientists initially thought it was a coincidence, until patterns emerged. Wherever the ships hovered, the environment improved. Crops that were dying began to grow again. Species thought extinct were seen near the restored forests. Governments tried to take credit, calling it a global environmental initiative. But Dr. Rivera knew the truth. Humans had never done this on their own. Something, or someone, was actively changing Earth's trajectory. At first, the relief was overwhelming. People cheered in the streets. Social media erupted with hope. For the first time in decades, humanity saw a future that wasn't bleak. But the message lingered in Dr. Rivera's mind. You are a danger. We must intervene. The interventions were not always gentle. Entire factories shut down without warning. Cars stopped in the middle of highways. Dams halted water flow abruptly. Humans were inconvenienced, sometimes endangered, for the sake of the planet. Panic slowly returned. Some called the aliens saviors. Others called them invaders. Then came the hardest truth. Dr. Rivera discovered the ships were capable of far more than environmental fixes. In isolated regions, they were removing humans entirely, not with weapons, but by relocation. Families vanished from cities, leaving homes empty, only to be replaced by flourishing gardens and forests. Entire towns were wiped off maps, silently, without destruction. She presented her findings to the world. Governments ignored her at first, then tried to suppress the information. But leaked videos, eyewitness accounts, and environmental data made it impossible to hide. Humanity faced a stark choice: continue on a path of destruction or accept the alien intervention, whatever it meant. By the end of Part 1, the question was no longer are they real, but what will they do next? Humanity was being judged, measured, and, in many ways, saved. But Dr. Rivera knew one thing with absolute certainty: the aliens were not here for humans' sake. They were here for Earth. And the future of humankind was far from guaranteed. The morning the aliens made their first direct intervention, the world woke to confusion. Entire industrial complexes in Asia had shut down overnight. Machines that had been running for decades simply stopped. Workers arrived at plants to find doors locked and gates sealed, yet no one had broken in. Surveillance cameras showed nothing, except, in the distance, faint glimpses of shimmering lights above the factories. In New York, a major highway simply ceased to function. Cars stalled mid-traffic. Horns blared, but engines refused to restart. People tried to push their vehicles, but it was as if the cars had become immovable. Helicopters sent to inspect the scene reported strange energy fields above the road, forming geometric shapes that pulsed with light. By evening, news channels were overwhelmed with similar reports. Factories, cities, farms, entire regions were being altered, not destroyed, but controlled. Rivers that had been poisoned for decades ran clear. Crops that had failed suddenly flourished. And in the middle of it all, humanity felt powerless. Dr. Elena Rivera watched from her lab in Madrid, analyzing satellite images and energy readings. Her team had developed a crude way to interpret the alien signals, a combination of electromagnetic patterns and light frequencies. What they discovered shocked them. The ships weren't just monitoring humans. They were restructuring the planet systems, intervening in ways no human technology could. They are not punishing us, Dr. Rivera said during a televised briefing. Her voice trembled with urgency. They are preventing us from causing further harm. They're guiding Earth back to balance. But the world didn't take her message well. Some people panicked, believing the aliens were preparing an invasion. Militias formed in rural areas. Governments scrambled to respond. In the United States, the military issued a statement: "We are monitoring unidentified aerial objects over our territory. Civilians should remain indoors until further notice." The interventions grew bolder. In Brazil, illegal logging operations vanished overnight. Deforested lands began to regenerate, saplings sprouting where machines had cleared trees. In Russia, polluted lakes filled with fresh water. And in Africa, deserts began to bloom in unexpected places. Yet, despite the apparent good, a sense of fear spread. Entire communities were being removed or relocated without warning. In some cases, homes disappeared, and families were gone, leaving only untouched nature behind. Governments tried to explain it as evacuations or experiments, but eyewitness footage told a different story. In Tokyo, a young girl named Yumi watched her street disappear beneath a shimmering field of green. Her family had vanished while she slept. When she ran to call the police, the street appeared normal again, as if nothing had happened. Yet she could feel the faint hum of the alien presence above. By now, the aliens' purpose was undeniable. They were saving Earth from humanity. But humans, for all their pride and arrogance, could not accept this. Global protests erupted. People demanded communication, demanded explanation. Some attempted attacks, firing missiles at the ships, only to have their weapons disabled in midair by invisible energy fields. Dr. Rivera convened a virtual summit with leading scientists, philosophers, and world leaders. Through their analysis, one terrifying truth emerged: The aliens had the ability to restructure ecosystems, manipulate matter, and relocate life with near-perfect precision. Earth could recover from centuries of human exploitation, but humans themselves were unpredictable variables. "We're like a virus to them," said Dr. Rivera, her words cold but clear. "They didn't come to conquer us. They came to cure the planet. And we are the disease." This revelation divided the world. Some saw the aliens as saviors, a force that humanity could never hope to match. Others saw them as tyrants, invisible rulers deciding the fate of billions. Religious leaders claimed the ships were angels or demons, while scientists struggled to comprehend the technology. Then, the first coordinated intervention occurred on a global scale. In the span of a single day, satellites recorded changes in every major ocean. Coral reefs began to regenerate. Dead zones in the water disappeared. Air pollution levels dropped dramatically. Humanity could not replicate these changes in centuries, yet the aliens achieved them in hours. The media was flooded with images, cities with clearer skies, rivers running clean, animals returning to areas they hadn't been seen in decades. For a moment, the world felt hope. But that hope was fragile. Alongside the miracles were signs of human resistance, and the aliens did not tolerate it. In Chicago, a group of armed rebels attempted to storm one of the hovering ships. Drones arrived instantly, disabling vehicles and scattering the crowd without harming a single person. Streets were blocked by invisible barriers, and the rebels found themselves trapped in a force field until the ships withdrew. Their failure was broadcast worldwide. Fear escalated into chaos. Governments attempted to assert control, issuing curfews and mobilizing armies. But the aliens were always one step ahead. No weapon reached them, no strategy could anticipate their interventions. They did not speak. They did not negotiate. They acted. And every action seemed perfectly calculated to restore balance. Meanwhile, Dr. Rivera's team made another shocking discovery. The ships were analyzing humans on an individual level. Personality patterns, tendencies toward violence or cooperation, environmental impact. Every person was being assessed. It was as if the aliens were determining not just how to save the planet, but how to manage humanity itself. A chilling thought took hold of Dr. Rivera. They are deciding who stays and who goes. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. And we may not even realize it until it's too late. Across the globe, whispers of disappearances spread. People began noticing gaps in their neighborhoods, colleagues who vanished without explanation. Some were relocated, others never returned. Panic became widespread. Entire cities began to feel empty, though no destruction occurred. And yet, the aliens never attacked. Their interventions were precise, deliberate, almost clinical. The message became terrifyingly clear. Earth was being saved, whether humanity liked it or not. As night fell over Madrid, Dr. Rivera gazed at the sky, where a massive ship hovered silently above the city. Its surface shimmered like liquid silver, reflecting the lights of the streets below. She realized humanity was no longer in control. Earth had new guardians, silent, powerful, and utterly indifferent to human pride. In the coming days, it would become evident that the planet's fate was being rewritten. And humanity's survival was not guaranteed. By the time Part 3 begins, humanity had realized the full scale of the alien presence. Cities had been altered, ecosystems were improving, and yet people were vanishing without warning. Fear, hope, and confusion coexisted in every corner of the globe. Governments convened emergency summits, trying to formulate a plan. The United Nations assembled a special task force, including military leaders, scientists, and diplomats, hoping to establish some kind of communication with the alien ships. But no matter what signals they sent, radio, lasers, or even mathematical patterns, the ships did not respond. Instead, the aliens acted. In one morning, forests in Scandinavia grew overnight, rivers in Africa returned to their natural courses, and deserts in the Middle East began to bloom. Satellite images confirmed changes that would have taken decades, or even centuries, to occur naturally. Humanity's most advanced technologies were dwarfed by the ship's capabilities. Some people began to worship the visitors. Temples were erected in open fields, churches reoriented toward the hovering vessels, and social media exploded with images praising the guardians of Earth. For these believers, the aliens were saviors, not invaders. Others, however, resisted. Militias formed in every continent. Leaders urged citizens to fight back, claiming that humanity's sovereignty was at stake. "We cannot allow these beings to control us," shouted a general in a live broadcast from Washington, D.C. "We will defend our world, our planet." But every attempt to resist failed. Missiles and fighter jets were intercepted mid-air. Tanks could not move under invisible forces. Even hackers trying to disable the ship systems found their computers mysteriously frozen or corrupted. The aliens were untouchable. Meanwhile, Dr. Elena Rivera continued her research. She and her team had finally discovered a chilling detail. The aliens were not just observing humanity, they were judging individuals. Data showed patterns of human behavior being recorded, levels of aggression, cooperation, environmental impact, and even moral choices. They are not just saving the planet, Dr. Rivera explained during a press conference. They are deciding which humans are compatible with the survival of Earth, and which ones are not. Her words sent shockwaves across the world. Resistance movements, however, refused to believe humanity could be deemed dangerous. They argued that the aliens had no right to interfere, no matter how advanced their technology. Entire factions formed, calling themselves the Defenders of Humanity. Their goal was to unite every country to repel the ships by force. And yet, the aliens remained silent. They never attacked. They never communicated. Their interventions were precise, always aiming to restore balance rather than harm. Entire industrial sectors were neutralized without violence, polluted rivers were purified without disrupting human life, endangered species returned to restored habitats. Despite these miracles, fear continued to spread. Families whose members disappeared reported strange phenomena: glowing lights in their homes, faint hums in the night, and an unshakable feeling of being watched. No one could explain why certain people vanished while others remained. By now, global governments were in chaos. Some declared martial law, others collapsed entirely. Cities emptied as people fled perceived danger zones. Meanwhile, the aliens' interventions accelerated. Regions previously devastated by human activity began to recover rapidly. The planet, in essence, was healing itself under the guidance of beings humans could neither understand nor resist. In Europe, a coalition of scientists attempted a radical experiment. They sent an unmanned probe directly into one of the ship's energy fields, hoping to record its structure. When the probe entered, it disappeared instantly, leaving behind a pulse of energy that cleaned the surrounding air and water. Scientists realized the ship's technology was incomprehensible, its logic entirely alien, yet precise and deliberate. Amid all this chaos, Dr. Rivera discovered a crucial fact. The aliens were capable of removing humans without harm, relocating them to safe areas while restoring the environment in their absence. They were effectively managing humanity, like a gardener tending a dangerous but necessary species. This realization sparked moral debates around the world. Philosophers asked, was it right to allow humans to remain if their existence endangered the planet? Were the aliens justified in their interventions, even if people did not survive in their original homes? And most terrifyingly, could humanity survive without their permission? The aliens were no longer just responding, they were initiating large-scale interventions. Entire cities were being restructured, forests regrew over industrial zones, rivers redirected themselves, and ecosystems began to stabilize. Humans, for the first time, were truly powerless. In the shadows, resistance groups plotted. Some aimed to destroy the ships. Others tried to flee to isolated areas. Yet, no one knew whether leaving was even possible. The aliens' influence stretched farther than anyone could see, touching the very land itself. Dr. Rivera, watching the skies above Madrid, could feel the weight of the moment. Humanity was being judged, measured, and corrected, not out of malice, but necessity. The planet was alive again, slowly healing from centuries of abuse, and the visitors were its caretakers. The final truth settled in her mind: Earth was no longer human territory. Humanity's survival depended entirely on the judgment of beings it could neither see clearly nor comprehend fully. By the time Part 4 begins, the world had changed beyond recognition. Cities no longer looked the same. In some regions, skyscrapers remained, but the streets were filled with greenery. Rivers carved new paths through urban centers, and forests grew where factories once stood. Humans watched helplessly as the Earth transformed, an unstoppable force of alien intervention reshaping the planet. Governments were struggling to maintain control. Nations that had once claimed sovereignty found their authority meaningless. Borders became irrelevant as ships hovered silently above every major city. Military forces tried to coordinate, but their weapons were neutralized before they could fire. Tanks refused to move on the roads, drones fell from the sky, and missiles dissolved mid-air.
Humanity was powerless.
Meanwhile, fear had turned into widespread panic. People began to question not only the aliens' purpose, but their own survival. Families feared they might disappear overnight. Communities reported missing neighbors, friends, and co-workers. Some were relocated safely. Others were gone with no trace, leaving homes empty and streets eerily quiet. The aliens' criteria for human relocation remained a mystery. Religious groups divided into factions. Some worshipped the ships as divine guardians sent to protect the planet. They built shrines beneath the hovering vessels, leaving offerings of food, flowers, and messages of gratitude. Others denounced the aliens as demons, insisting humanity had the right to dominate Earth regardless of the consequences. Mass protests erupted in multiple cities, but the ships remained indifferent, continuing their interventions without aggression. Dr. Elena Rivera worked tirelessly to understand their behavior. Using complex algorithms and electromagnetic readings, her team discovered patterns in the aliens' actions. They were prioritizing areas of the planet most damaged by human activity. Industrial zones, polluted rivers, overfarmed lands, and deforested regions were being repaired first. Humans, however, were unpredictable variables. The aliens did not punish people, they simply relocated or restricted them when necessary to restore balance. The planet is the priority, Dr. Rivera explained to a live audience.
Not humans. We are secondary.
And if we fail to act responsibly, the consequences are unavoidable. Her words were met with disbelief and outrage. Many accused her of fearmongering, while others began to accept the chilling truth. Humanity was under judgment, and the aliens were its arbiter.
In the United States, resistance movements intensified.
Armed militias attempted to destroy or disrupt the ships, believing that human ingenuity could overcome alien technology.
But each attempt failed spectacularly.
Invisible barriers prevented access to the ships. Vehicles and weapons malfunctioned in unpredictable ways. Even hackers who tried to interfere with energy readings found their systems corrupted and rendered useless. Every effort to fight back only demonstrated the futility of resistance. At the same time, there were stories of human cooperation. In small pockets, communities began to adapt to the aliens' presence. People stopped fighting and started observing the changes around them. Crops flourished, water ran clean, and air quality improved dramatically. In these areas, humans began to coexist with the interventions, learning to live in a world that was no longer entirely theirs. But such cooperation came with a price. Entire neighborhoods, towns, and cities were removed from human habitation and transformed into thriving ecosystems.
Parks replaced urban centers. Forests grew where highways once ran.
Animals returned to areas long abandoned, and ecosystems healed faster than any scientist had predicted. For those who remained, the alien presence was a constant reminder that the Earth itself had a new guardian. Global communication networks were overwhelmed with reports of strange phenomena. People described glowing fields in their homes, faint hums in the air, and shadows of shimmering light moving across the sky. Some claimed to hear whispers or see visions of the planet as it once was, and as it could be again. Scientists struggled to explain these experiences, but they all pointed to one conclusion. The aliens were not just changing the environment, they were interacting with human perception and consciousness. In Japan, a team of researchers led by Dr. Rivera observed that the aliens seemed to prioritize humans who contributed positively to the planet. Farmers, conservationists, and scientists were often left undisturbed, while those engaged in destructive activities, illegal logging, polluting industries, or violent conflicts, were at higher risk of being relocated. It was a silent, impartial judgment system, more precise than any human court or government could devise. As the world adapted, ethical dilemmas arose. Should humanity accept alien interventions, even if it meant losing control over their own planet? Could humans coexist with beings whose intelligence and technology were incomprehensible? And most frightening of all, what determined who would remain and who would be removed? Dr. Rivera feared that the aliens' patience was not infinite. While they did not act aggressively, they acted decisively. Humanity had time, but it was a limited commodity. If humans failed to change their destructive behavior, more removals would occur. Entire regions could become off-limits to humans, and survival might depend on compliance rather than choice. By the end of Part 4, the world was caught between awe and terror. The Earth was healing in ways unimaginable, but humans were no longer in control. Their freedom, power, and influence had been replaced by alien judgment. And the question hung over every person on the planet. By now, the aliens' presence was no longer a distant mystery. They hovered above every major city, every forest, every ocean, and every desert. Their interventions were no longer random. Entire regions were being transformed systematically. Humanity could no longer claim dominance over Earth. The planet had new caretakers, silent and unstoppable. Families began to experience the alien judgment firsthand. In Madrid, a young couple, Sofia and Javier, awoke to find their apartment empty of furniture, though the walls remained intact. Their neighbors had disappeared entirely. Outside, the streets were overgrown with plants, and the air smelled fresher than ever. It was beautiful, but terrifying. "I don't understand," Sofia whispered, clutching Javier's hand. "Why are we still here?" Javier shook his head, unable to answer. They had not caused harm directly, yet they had survived while others had vanished. The aliens' criteria were unknowable. They seemed impartial but absolute. Humanity, they realized, was being judged, not with violence, but with removal. In Africa, communities that had resisted environmental change found themselves relocated. Villages vanished from their original locations and reappeared miles away, often in safer, more ecologically balanced areas. The people had no memory of the relocation. They simply woke up in a new place. Some were grateful. Others were terrified. All were changed. Dr. Rivera and her team continued their analysis. They discovered a frightening truth. The aliens had the ability to calculate long-term ecological outcomes with astonishing precision. Every human action was weighed against the survival of the planet. Regions that had been destructive for centuries were prioritized for intervention, and humans in those regions were either corrected or removed entirely. "It's like they are running simulations on all of humanity," Dr. Rivera explained in a live briefing. "We can't begin to match their calculations. They are not here to punish us, but if we don't meet their standards, we could be removed." The world reacted in different ways. Some people accepted the aliens' judgment, changing their behavior to align with the interventions. Farmers adopted sustainable practices, factories closed down voluntarily, and communities focused on conservation. Others resisted, believing that humans had the right to dominate Earth. But resistance was increasingly futile. Every act of aggression was countered with nonviolent precision. Roads became impassable, machinery stopped working, and even the smallest disruptions were corrected. In Tokyo, a schoolteacher named Haruto found himself facing the aliens' judgment personally. His classroom had been overrun with a sudden growth of plants, breaking windows and filling the floor with soil. Some students disappeared, leaving empty desks. Haruto realized that his actions, or the actions of those around him, had contributed to an imbalance. "We can't fight them," Haruto told his students, his voice trembling. "We have to learn, or we might not stay." Meanwhile, governments continued to struggle. The United Nations tried to mediate, calling for diplomacy and international cooperation. But the aliens did not negotiate. They did not speak. They simply acted, restructuring human settlements, natural habitats, and ecological systems. In South America, a team of researchers documented a forest restoration project. Entire logging operations vanished overnight. The ground was replenished with new vegetation, animals returned, and rivers changed course to sustain life. For humans observing the change, it was miraculous, but it was also a warning. The aliens could undo any human activity, no matter how long it had existed. Ethical debates spread across the globe. Was it right to accept alien interventions if it meant giving up control over Earth? Could humans coexist with beings who judged every action, every life, and every decision? And most importantly, what determined who would be removed and who would remain? In small pockets, communities began to adapt. They worked to align their behavior with the observable changes. Farmers rotated crops sustainably. Cities focused on clean energy. People tried to reduce waste, preserve water, and protect endangered species. For some, it was a moral awakening. For others, it was sheer survival. But the aliens' interventions were not uniform. Entire regions were being cleared of destructive humans, replaced with flourishing ecosystems. Forests reclaimed industrial zones, rivers flowed through deserted towns, and wildlife returned to areas long abandoned. Humanity had little choice but to watch. In one instance, a city in Canada was evacuated silently. People woke up to empty streets, no trace of intervention except the sudden presence of lush green parks, thriving wildlife, and restored rivers. The inhabitants were relocated to safe areas, but the aliens' reasons remained unknown. Dr. Rivera warned the world, "We are being tested. Not in battle,
not with weapons, but by our actions.
The planet is the priority. Our survival is secondary. If we fail to change, we may not remain. By the end of Part 5, humanity understood a chilling reality. The Earth was healing, but humans were no longer in control. Survival depended not on technology, armies, or governments, but on cooperation, responsibility, and the aliens' judgment. As night fell across the planet, the alien ships hovered silently, their silver surfaces reflecting the lights of rebuilt cities, regrown forests, and flowing rivers. Humanity had been given a chance, but it was clear that the next phase of judgment would be even more personal. By the time Part 6 begins, humanity was no longer in control of its own world. Entire regions had been altered, some thriving with renewed ecosystems, while others were eerily empty. The alien presence was undeniable. Vast silver ships hovered silently above cities, forests, rivers, and deserts, executing interventions that humans could neither predict nor resist.
In London, panic escalated.
Entire neighborhoods disappeared overnight. Families awoke to find streets overgrown, roads cracked, and buildings partially replaced by green spaces and restored rivers. Some people had vanished, relocated to unknown areas, while others remained in transformed surroundings, unsure why they had survived. Journalists risked everything to document the events. Footage showed forests reclaiming city blocks, wildlife returning to urban centers, and rivers flowing through deserted streets. Social media exploded with images and videos, but no one could explain why certain people were removed and others left behind. Dr. Elena Rivera warned the public, the aliens are not punishing.
They are removing humans who contribute to destruction or imbalance.
We must change our behavior if we hope to remain. Cooperation is survival. Resistance is dangerous.
Despite the warnings, resistance groups intensified.
Militias, survivalists, and extremist factions launched coordinated attacks against the ships, attempting to reclaim control.
But every effort failed.
Invisible barriers, halted vehicles, and malfunctioning weapons made human attacks ineffective. In some cases, rebels found themselves relocated along with the areas they tried to defend, waking miles away in safe zones while their home regions were restored. In the Amazon, Dr. Rivera's team observed large-scale human removal. Logging camps and industrial sites vanished overnight. Villagers who had resisted change disappeared silently, only to reappear later in areas far from their original homes. When they awoke, their surroundings were safe, untouched, and conducive to life, but they had no memory of how they got there. The ethical implications were staggering.
Governments struggled to respond.
Leaders debated whether to instruct citizens to comply with the aliens' interventions or to resist, knowing resistance might result in disappearance. Philosophers argued about free will, morality, and humanity's right to remain on a planet it had long destroyed. Meanwhile, cooperation began to emerge as the only viable option for survival. Communities that aligned with environmental restoration, conservation, and sustainable practices were often left intact. Farms shifted to sustainable agriculture. Factories voluntarily reduced emissions or shut down. People started to protect forests, rivers, and wildlife. It was not compliance born of belief, but compliance born of necessity. In Tokyo, Haruto, the school teacher, became a leader in guiding students and families to cooperate with the aliens' subtle instructions. He helped his community plant trees, clean rivers, and adopt sustainable practices. Over time, they noticed that areas they cared for were not subject to removal, while destructive behavior in nearby neighborhoods triggered alien intervention.
But fear persisted.
Humans were still vanishing, often without warning. In Africa, entire towns disappeared overnight, leaving no trace of human habitation. When residents reappeared, they were in untouched wilderness, often disoriented and frightened. The aliens' logic was incomprehensible, but their purpose was clear: restore Earth, with or without humans. The aliens themselves remained inscrutable. They did not communicate in words, gestures, or symbols that humans could fully understand. Yet their presence was constant, undeniable, and absolute. Wherever humans acted destructively, the aliens intervened. Wherever humans cooperated with ecological restoration, the aliens allowed them to remain. Dr. Rivera observed a terrifying pattern. The aliens were not just judging individuals, they were judging humanity as a species. Large-scale removals were not random. They targeted regions with concentrated destructive behavior, and as such, entire nations or populations were at risk. Humanity's survival depended not on power, wealth, or technology, but on collective behavior and moral responsibility. As winter approached in the northern hemisphere, the aliens accelerated their interventions. Rivers froze and thawed in ways that restored ecosystems. Forests regrew at unnatural speeds. And humans continued to disappear if their behavior contributed to imbalance. In South America, a relocated family awoke to find themselves in a pristine valley, untouched by humans. The children were confused but unharmed. They realized that their survival depended on adapting to the new reality. The aliens decided who could remain on Earth, and humans had no say in the matter. Across the globe, humanity faced a stark choice: continue destructive behavior and risk removal, or cooperate with the aliens' silent guidance to survive. Ethical, political, and social dilemmas emerged. Could humans trust one another to act responsibly? Could they overcome greed, violence, and selfishness to preserve both themselves and the planet? By the end of Part 6, the world was irrevocably changed. Cities had been altered, forests restored, rivers rerouted, and humans relocated. The aliens' judgment was no longer theoretical. It was real, palpable, and unavoidable. Humanity's survival depended on understanding the aliens' purpose and learning to coexist with their interventions. The message was clear: the Earth was being saved, but humans were not guaranteed to remain. Those who refused to adapt or contributed to destruction would disappear. And the aliens, silent and precise, were both the guardians of the planet and the arbiters of humanity's fate. By the seventh phase of the alien intervention, humanity's reality had shifted completely. Entire landscapes had been transformed. Cities that once sprawled with concrete and steel were now filled with forests, rivers, and wildlife. Human structures coexisted with nature only where people had shown care, while destructive areas had been reclaimed entirely by the planet. The aliens' presence was constant and undeniable. Every day, people noticed shimmering vessels hovering silently above urban centers, forests, and oceans. Their surfaces reflected the Earth below, like mirrors that reminded humans of the world they had damaged, and the consequences of neglect. Global panic persisted, but now it carried a new dimension. Entire governments, unable to assert control, either surrendered to the aliens' interventions or dissolved entirely. Military leaders had no weapons capable of resisting. Human rebellion had failed repeatedly, proving that the ships were untouchable. Those who tried to flee found themselves relocated to safer zones, far from their homes, without memory of the journey. Dr. Elena Rivera observed the latest wave of interventions with both awe and fear. Satellite images showed large swaths of land in North America and Asia being restored simultaneously. Rivers reshaped themselves, forests reclaimed abandoned farmland, and wildlife returned in unprecedented numbers. Humans in these regions had either adapted to sustainable practices or were quietly relocated. It's no longer just individual judgment, Dr. Rivera said in a global broadcast. The aliens are assessing humanity collectively. Entire populations are evaluated based on cooperation and ecological responsibility. Our survival as a species depends on our ability to change, now. Resistance groups, once defiant, were either disbanded or neutralized. Militias in rural areas attempted to attack the ships with conventional weapons, only to find their vehicles immobilized and communications disabled. Attempts at sabotage resulted in accidental removal. Entire groups vanished overnight, leaving nothing but flourishing ecosystems behind. Amidst the global chaos, individual human stories unfolded, revealing the emotional weight of the alien interventions. In Brazil, a young biologist named Marco watched his city vanish while he and a small team were relocated to a restored jungle. For the first time, he saw animals return to areas destroyed by deforestation. While grateful for the beauty, he mourned the loss of neighbors, friends, and the familiar world he once knew. In Europe, a teacher named Ingrid awoke to empty streets. Her students had been relocated, and her school had been transformed into a vibrant forest. She realized the aliens were shaping the planet not just for survival, but for restoration, and that humans who contributed positively could remain, but only if they adapted. Dr. Rivera discovered a deeper aspect of the aliens' judgment. They weren't acting randomly, they were implementing dynamic relocation and restoration strategies. Humans were moved according to their ecological footprint and cooperative behavior. Entire regions were rebuilt to sustain life, but humans had to align themselves with the planet's health to remain. The ethical and emotional consequences were profound. Families were separated, cities emptied, and familiar landmarks erased. Humanity was learning a hard truth: survival was conditional, not guaranteed. The aliens' interventions were deliberate, precise, and mercilessly impartial. As the world adapted, cooperation emerged as the only path forward. Communities organized around ecological restoration, renewable energy, and sustainable farming. People shared resources, repaired damaged lands, and learned to live in balance with the environment. Those who embraced these principles often avoided removal. Yet fear lingered. No one knew how long the aliens would allow humanity to continue. Entire populations had been relocated without explanation. Those who resisted were gone forever. Humanity was being tested, not with force, but with moral responsibility, ecological stewardship, and adaptability. In one remarkable event, a city in Canada experienced a complete transformation in hours. Industrial plants that had polluted rivers for decades were dismantled and replaced by wetlands. Streets were overgrown with greenery, and animals returned. Humans who had cooperated with environmental efforts remained, while those resistant to change disappeared quietly, leaving an eerie balance between restoration and absence. Dr. Rivera realized that the aliens' interventions were not only ecological but also psychological. Humans who survived were adapting to a world where their actions directly influenced the planet's health. Every destructive choice risked removal, while every responsible act strengthened their place on Earth. By the end of Part 7, humanity faced a chilling reality. The planet was healing, but humans were no longer the masters of their world. Survival depended on cooperation, morality, and ecological responsibility. Those who failed to adapt would disappear. Those who succeeded could remain, but the judgment was ongoing, impartial, and absolute. The message was now clear to all: Earth was no longer human territory. Humans were guests, observers, and caretakers, but only if they proved capable of caring for the planet itself. The aliens were not saviors in the traditional sense. They were guardians, arbiters, and judges. And humanity had reached the moment of reckoning. The final stage of the alien intervention arrived silently, without warning. Across the globe, the atmosphere seemed to hum with anticipation. Cities, forests, rivers, and deserts were all in transformation. And humans had finally begun to understand the full scale of what was happening. Entire populations had been removed, relocated, or retained depending on their actions. Areas that had once been dominated by pollution, war, and exploitation had been reclaimed by nature. Mountainsides regrew forests, deserts bloomed with life, rivers returned to their original courses, and species thought extinct appeared once more. For the humans who remained, life was a delicate balance. Every action mattered. Every choice, how they farmed, how they consumed resources, how they treated one another, was observed and assessed. Cooperation was no longer optional. Resistance was no longer possible. Survival depended entirely on aligning with the planet's restoration. Dr. Elena Rivera stood in the middle of a regenerated park in Madrid, watching the silver ships hover above. The sky reflected in their surfaces like molten mirrors, and she felt both awe and fear. Humanity had been humbled, brought to a level of accountability it had never known. "They aren't here to destroy us," she told a group of scientists and journalists. "They are here to save the planet. And we are just part of the equation." Around the world, humans were adapting. Communities embraced ecological restoration. Cities had new designs, half built by humans, half allowed to grow naturally. Technology was used responsibly, energy harnessed cleanly, and nature was allowed to thrive alongside humanity. Those who failed to adapt quietly disappeared, relocated to safe areas, or erased from human habitation entirely. No violence accompanied these removals. They were precise, deliberate, and final. In one remarkable example, a small village in the Amazon reappeared on satellite images transformed into a thriving forest reserve. The villagers who remained had long worked to protect the land. Others who had exploited it were gone. The planet continued to heal, with or without humans. The aliens themselves remained inscrutable. They did not communicate with words, gestures, or symbols comprehensible to humans. Their purpose was clear, but their methods were entirely alien: restoration, judgment, and preservation. Humans had no influence over them. They were observers and participants, not masters. Despite the fear, some humans found hope. People learned to live in harmony with the planet. Families who had been relocated discovered new communities thriving in restored ecosystems. Children grew up in worlds where forests and cities coexisted, rivers were clean, and wildlife returned. The Earth was alive again, and humans could finally take part in its care. But the underlying lesson remained: survival was conditional. The aliens had saved the planet, but humanity's place on it was not guaranteed. Every destructive action could result in removal. Every irresponsible decision endangered not only individuals but entire communities. Dr. Rivera reflected on what humanity had learned. Pride, arrogance, and greed had brought humans to the brink of destruction. Only through humility, cooperation, and care for the planet could humans remain. The aliens were not saviors in the traditional sense. They were guardians of a world that had no room for unchecked destruction. In the final weeks, subtle changes became evident. Humans who adapted responsibly found their surroundings flourishing. Deserts bloomed with new life. Oceans cleared. Forests reclaimed abandoned lands. And humans who resisted, who harmed the environment or ignored their responsibility, quietly disappeared, leaving no trace. The alien ships began to ascend slowly, one by one. Their purpose had been fulfilled. The planet was stable again, ecosystems restored, and humanity's place, though uncertain, had been tested. They left silently, disappearing into the stars as mysteriously as they had arrived. The world was quiet afterward, yet transformed. Humans stood on a planet that was alive, vibrant, and renewed. Cities and forests, rivers and mountains, humans and wildlife, all existed in a fragile but harmonious balance. Humanity had been humbled, but it had survived, not through power, but through responsibility.
Dr. Rivera looked up at the sky one last time.
The aliens were gone, but the lesson remained. The Earth would endure, but only if humans remembered their place as caretakers, not conquerors. And in the silence, the world understood the ultimate truth. The aliens had come to save Earth, from us. And now, it was humanity's turn to save itself.